Hello, everyone. Welcome to the AI for Healthcare webinar. And today we have a very special speaker. Let me introduce the speaker. First of all, I'm the host for AI for Healthcare webinar. I'm Zifeng Wang, associate professor from University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign. Today, it's my great honor to introduce Zifeng Wang, a PhD candidate from University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign. In fact, he just successfully defended his thesis. Almost, right? So there's one last step, but I think very soon we can call him Dr. Wang, hopefully in a month. Zifeng is also a co-founder for KGAI, and based on his research for AI for clinical trials, he, along with others, has created this startup focusing on converting some of this research he has done into practice to help clinical design execution analysis. And his work has been published in major venues, in journals and in computer science conferences, but also have been featured in many different media outlets, including interview by Nature and also publicized by National Institute of Health and their NIH director blogs, Political, and others. So without further ado, let's welcome Zifeng Wang. And thanks, Zifeng. Please go ahead.
Okay, thanks, Professor Song, for his invitation and the introduction. So this is Zifeng, and today I will try to introduce our recent works in leveraging large language models for several clinical trial applications, including like design, execution, and analysis of clinical trials data and results. So just give you a little bit background if you are not familiar with clinical trials. So clinical trial is an important step during the drug discovery and the development process. So this is a kind of an overview of that process. You start from like selecting from tens of thousands more compounds to set the ones you want to do the testing, like preclinical testing for animal studies. And that's the most of in the drug discovery stage. And in the development stage, you need to like select a candidate compound that you want to go to the human study. Well, you have to evaluate the safety first in the phase 1 trial, then go to testing more on the efficacy and also broadly the safety for more populations in phase 2 trials and phase 3 clinical trials until you have the final results and submit to government agencies like, for example, FDA for review, and then make the decision to if you want to make this drug commercialized. And when it goes to the market, you have either like phase 4 clinical trials trying to monitor the efficacy and the safety outcomes when it's tested and used in more like a broader populations. So this process has been quite time consuming. This is like a set of numbers we can find from the literature. On average, this process may take a decade and more. And on average, it takes $1 billion to $2 billion US for new drug to get approved from this process. The failure rate is quite high, like 90% of drug candidates go into clinical trial and actually failed at last. So this is just a roughly approximation of how costly and time-consuming clinical trial can be. So this just highlights the need to streamline this process so you can just know your results earlier, or even just try to optimize your clinical trial and the candidate selection, drug candidate selection, population selection, your trial design, then you can avoid the potentially failure because of the inappropriate like trial planning. Okay, so we can decompose the clinical trial research process into a couple of steps. Hypothesis generation stage, you get your insights from the literature about like which drug may be applicable to which type of indications or like which type of specific populations based on their drug biomarkers. And you can also design your clinical trial like the eligibility criteria, your outcome measurements, the arm design, and so on. And then we go to the execution stage. We want to like recruit the participants, and then go to the analysis stage. You have collected the clinical trials results, right? Those raw data, and you have to do your data science, data analysis to get the, like for example, the survival outcomes of the populations, the different arms, and report these results to government agencies, or just write a paper describing your clinical research results. So in this roadmap, we have explored a couple of approaches, right? For hypothesis generation, we have developed large language models that learn from scientific literature, like those medical publications, and clinical trial records. For example, the trial design you can find from clinicaltrials.gov with two models, like TrialMind and LEADS. We will introduce more detail today on like accelerating the literature review and the meta-analysis process. And the study design phase, we have developed the models that can encode the different types of clinical trial documents into so-called embeddings that can help like retrieve the similar documents given like your input request. So this is a core function you need to do if you want to use like retrieval augmented generation using large language models. And also we have developed a large language model that can exactly drop some parts of clinical trial design, for example, LGPT criteria. And in the study execution stage, we have explored like, because you have now participant recruitment process, we have to deal with like patient records, like clinical notes, and the other like real world patient data in structured database, and also sometimes multimodality patient data like images and text. So I'll introduce more about like how we use large language model to streamline patient recruitment. Like this is especially this TrialGPT pipeline. And the last stage, when in the analysis clinical trials results, we want to evaluate like how large language model can help actually streamline the data science process, like analyzing clinical trial data, and how it can work together with like medical users to like get seamlessly integrated in their workflow and accelerate this process. And so all of these works, they have been published in some AI venues like NeurIPS, KDD, and also some like journals like Nature Communications. Today, I will decompose the talk into three parts. In the first part, I will introduce these two works while we develop a large language model-based approach for literature research in clinical trials. Specifically, the TrialMind work and the LEADS models we have developed. I would like to thank the collaborators from a wide range of institutes, for example, our NIH and Cornell, as well as Harvard collaborators help us a lot in formulate the research question and design experiments. So the first work I will try to introduce is like how we adapt the generic large language model like ChatGPT you may be aware of for literature research in medicine. And specifically, the target of this pipeline is to accelerate the clinical evidence synthesis from the literature. For example, this is a pyramid of clinical evidence, different types of clinical evidence you can find from the medical literature. From the bottom one, we have the lowest quality, unfiltered information of clinical evidence, like some expert opinions. Then going up, we have higher quality ones, some case reports, then go to the randomized control trials, so you have better quality than just like cohort studies. And at the very top of this pyramid, we have systematic literature reviews and meta-analysis. So this kind of evidence represents the ones which undergo the like expert reviewing and the filtering of the information, those unfiltered information from the literature. And they are regarded as the highest quality evidence you can find from literature. So people are doing these reviews very frequently. One example of clinical evidence you can get from these reviews are like in a meta-analysis of a couple of studies for those patients, you find a specific disease X and drug Y can reduce its mortality rate by some percent compared to the other drug. So this kind of evidence just directly applies to improve the patient outcomes. Like you can enhance the clinical decision making in the future because it suggests that drug Y may be more useful to treat, like to improve the patient survival for this disease X. The other type of evidence that can benefit from clinical trial designs, like you have a meta-analysis of several studies, and you find that specifically a subpopulation, for example, patient with a gene mutation, experience just like better outcomes in terms of survival compared to those populations who do not have this gene mutation. So this is kind of biomarkers which are frequently now used to identify the target subpopulation to develop new treatments. So this kind of evidence, if you can find and create, can help you plan for your new clinical trial, right? For example, maybe develop new target therapy for disease X, right? Patients for this subpopulation using drug Y. But this review is quite useful and helpful, and people are doing that a lot. But there are indeed several challenges, right, doing this review. And the first one is this. I just take an example of which called Prisma flow, and it's a common figure people report in their review paper. it basically describes the workflow, how they formulate their review, like from identifying the data sources from like publications from multiple data sources like EM-based PubMed, and then goes to like very complicated and manual process of selecting the target studies by reading their titles, abstracts, full text, and go to the a final subset, a very small subset of the 1,000 articles, for example, 30 or 20 of them, you are using them to analyze, like to read the full content, extract the results, and do the qualitative and quantitative analysis. So this process itself is quite complicated, but which makes it worse is like the PubMed, like the literature database is growing very fast right now. This is like a distribution of like number of PubMed index papers over time from like 2018 to 2023. And now there are like over actually 35 million plus medical papers you can find from PubMed. And also people are doing systematic literature review very frequently. Like I just did like a very quick search on keyword search for SLRs in like on PubMed, you get like 50K around like the published SLRs annually, just roughly search. So the need for doing review is high, and the literature database is growing fast, and this has caused the result that now it takes more and more efforts manually, like on average 5 experts, and over a year. This is from a study reports that this amount of effort has to be made to like actually get a review completed and published. But since the literature is growing fast, so after this a year of process doing review, the newly generated review, the new evidence may just become outdated very fast because like this process just so long. And so this is our motivation to build this pipeline, since LLMs, as we know, like are very powerful in like processing some information, give us like streamline the information, like understanding of some information. So the question is how we adapt LLM to a pipeline that can seamlessly integrate it into this process. So let's get back to this example workflow. We can decompose this workflow into several steps. Right? First step, identifying the publications from different sources. So this is like a study search process. Like we can use LM to enhance the study search. And the second component is to selecting, like after you have identified 1,000 more studies, you have to read the abstracts, read the titles. So this is like more of a study screening process with some predefined eligibility criteria of your target studies, and to make sure which one are the exactly you want to involve in your final analysis. And the last step is like to, after you have finalized your study cohort, the candidate studies, you want to extract the data, right? The study design, the study characteristics, and also the results from the studies, as well as like aggregating those results into some kind of meta-analysis to get aggregated outcomes. So with this decomposition, we further want to develop a pipeline with a platform that a user can interact with LM with no coding, and to like streamline this process as well. So we have this pipeline like has like 4 steps. Like this video just showed the first step. You have your research question, which is defined in the PICO framework. Like PICO means like population, intervention, comparison, and outcomes. So here we have defined the population, like patient with refractory or relapse, like hematologic or solid malignancies. So this is like your definition of a research question for which population you are targeted for, and also intervention, CAR T therapy, and some outcome of interest. So with this kind of question, a research question definition, we can start the analysis. Well, we can trigger LLM to generate these search terms and also sample more search terms in terms of which keywords, like treatment terms and condition terms, derived from your research question. Then we can like use these search terms and LLMs to fetch the studies and rank the studies by their relevance and get the initial identification of the candidate studies. And this becomes the solid starting point. While the recall of this process is quite important, because if you cannot find the target studies from the initial search, whatever screening you did, you will not find your target studies. So we have evaluated the recall, like how many % of ground truth target studies we can find using our platform, compare with to just ask ChatGPT to help you generate a term and find it from the internet. So we have like TrialMind recall with over 90% most of cases over vanilla GPT baseline that can get like a 10% or even lower ground truth studies from the search results. And we also have like human baseline, which we just ask annotators to extract the keywords from the research question and use these keywords to search the studies. So this has lower like coverage than the TrialMind pipeline because these keywords may not necessarily be identical to the ones you find in the publications, right? Usually you need to augment it with different variations, like some abbreviations and so on to improve the coverage. So that's how our pipeline can get a high recall than this human-based and vanilla GPT baselines. The second step is the study screening, right? You have identified your initial study list, and we can define the eligibility criteria based on your research question, like if it's a clinical trials or if it's indeed target for blood cancer or solid cancer patients and so on. So we have this LM suggested criteria, and you can also edit this as you want or add new criteria. And with this criteria, we can trigger our AI agent to read the title and abstracts of all these involved studies and just predict the eligibility of each study for each criterion by like eligible or ineligible or just not enough information because we cannot find that information from the abstracts. So with this like very clear eligibility prediction, we can do some kind of ranking and filtering. So you can rank the studies which meet the most eligibility criteria you set at the top. So you can quickly find the ones you want to read, then you want to involve in your like data extraction stage. Then after you have like selected the studies from the top, right, you have the ranking and then you select the studies. Then the next step is to extract the data from those like publications. So our platform like pipeline adjusts the LLM to do this task. Like you can define the target field you want to extract, for example, the number of patients, or like the other participant flow related question like follow-up period, like or like population statistical information like the average age and so on. So it's quite flexible. You can just define this target field and we will just pass this description of the target field and to trigger our AI agent just read those papers, the full content of those papers and try to get a structured outputs, right? You can populate this table with new like new data fields you have just defined, and you can then just draw this table and to get a further filtering or just like synthesize some aggregate information like average patients they recruit from this type of clinical trials. And we have like tested our pipeline specifically optimized for data extraction from medical publications. And this pipeline has been better than the vanilla GPT prompting baseline by like a margin of over 15% accuracy. And the last step is to synthesize the evidence, where you want to define your outcome measurements, for example, like some complete response rate or overall response rate and some of the other outcomes, whatever outcomes you are interested in and exist in the involved studies. Then you can also define some kind of grouping strategy, which is like the target subpopulations you are interested in. So we have this interface, you can define this setup and just extract the target outcomes from those studies. So here, this is so-called forest plot. You have like each row is a result from one study and also the aggregated information from all of those studies, which is a very like solid quantitative evidence you can get from the involved studies. And this is like what people will report in their review as a meta-analysis and get this like a numerical evidence. So we have conducted a user study like for 5 reviews. We use our platform to synthesize this evidence and also have a ChatGPT plus human, like you can upload your the target studies as a PDF and chat with those PDF to get the evidence. So we have 8 annotators and most of them prefer our like outputs, right? Over the current practice, people just work with ChatGPT. So in this paper, we have like discussed how we adapt the generic LLM with some special prompting or RAG or something like that to improve the task, like the medical literature mining task. And next, I will introduce like how we develop specialized LLMs, like not just based on ChatGPT, but how we have a special LLM just for medical literature mining tasks, which is this LEADS paper. So our motivation becomes to train LLMs, you need a large amount of data. And for literature mining, there are actually a lot of open literature data we can leverage, right? For example, clinicaltrials.gov, you can easily find 500,000 more clinical trial records. And from the medical publications, you can find from Cochrane, PubMed Central, and there are like tens of millions medical publication. And from them, you have maybe 2 million more are actually clinical trial publications and also systematic literature reviews. But the question is, we can indeed collect this raw data, but to build a specialized LLM, you need a special format of this data, which is called instruction data, right? It describes the task and has the ground truth output for the task. But from those raw data, they just do not have this type of format. We need to convert this to instruction data following format to exactly fit our need for the task, for like this task of study search, screening, and data extraction. So this is a core question: how we can leverage this enormous public literature data to build a specialized LLM. So we start from the source data like reviews, publication, clinical trial design information, and for the first two tasks, we can leverage the links between the reviews and the studies involved in their analysis, right? We actually have find 20,000 more reviews with such linkage, and this linkage is useful for the first two tasks because they are all about finding the target studies. So this is an example review paper, and usually this type of paper has one table, which we can call table 1, has the characteristics of the involved studies in their review. So from this table, the first column, the reference, so those are the ground truth studies, right? If you do the study search and you try to reproduce this review, the target of the target involved analysis, the studies to be analyzed are those studies they involve in their table 1. And the other columns, for example, like sample size, median age, lines of prior treatment, and so on, they are the target data from those publications, which were manually extracted from the authors of these reviews and can be treated as a ground truth, like human annotated high quality target data to extracted from the publications. So for task 3, we further formulate this data extraction task by linking the publication and the clinical trial records. So for example, this is one clinical trial paper, right? It has a NCT ID linked to this, NCT number explicitly mentioned in these abstracts. So we can then find clinical trial records, right? These records from this website has exactly the structured data, like the sample size is an integer with 26, and target condition, list of keywords of the condition terminology. So this naturally becomes the target, right? If you have an unstructured publication document, you can ask LLM, try to extract the structured outputs as we can find from clinicaltrials.gov. So it's quite rich. It has many kinds of target data you can find, like participant flow, the baseline, outcome measure, adverse events, and all those results and study design related information. So with this strategy, we can create a very large instruction data, and it actually has 20,000 reviews and hundreds, thousands of publications and clinical trial records. And this has become the largest, to our knowledge, largest training and testing data for medical literature mining tasks for search, screening, and extraction. So then the next story will be quite straightforward, right? You have already got instruction data with clear, high quality human annotated outputs. So we just do this so-called supervised fine tuning, to train a generic large language model like Mistral, exactly in this case, and to adapt this model by this fine tuning to be a specialized model we call LEADS. And then we just perform an evaluation of this model with comparing it with larger and those generic LLMs like GPT-4o as a cutting edge model you can use for out of box from generic domain. And we just find this lightweight model just with a simple supervised fine tuning can already outperform this generic model on all types of these tasks we from literature mining related tasks like search query generation, for study search, eligibility prediction for citation ranking, and so on. And what's more, we want to evaluate, like, since this model has a quite good performance, then we want to know, okay, when we have a medical expert working with this model for the time-consuming part of literature mining, for example, screening, then how would the performance differs compared to the one that expert just working on that manually, right? This is what we're interested in, the practical value of this type of model can bring. So we have these two arms, experts working with AI versus expert only. And we have invited like 16 clinicians and medical researchers from 14 institutions. And we invite them to do this user study and observe comparable like a quality of their screening results, and with like over 20% time savings in this process. So it's indeed introduces some efficiency improvement, but we want to highlight the case that we are just doing a simplified user study here. Like we assign each human participant with like 30 studies, and they are ought to find 10 targets from this 30. But in real case, you are just doing study screening, you are encountering many more studies than 30, right? For example, maybe 300 or even 10, like 1,000 studies you want to screen. So this becomes like much harder, right? If you want to select like 10 targets from 300 studies, then this becomes quite sparse, right? If you need to rate them entire, and if compare with you have AI to rank them, definitely when more time saving will be expected. But we want to leave that larger scale user study in the future. But we do have some proof that may happen exactly, because we have like confusion matrix. We show that what experts selected and what our model believe should be included in this systematic literature reviews. And we find that from this confusion matrix, expert and our model's idea are quite consistent. So from the studies which were not selected by experts are also the studies which were believed that our model believed that shouldn't be involved, like with very low scores. So we exactly have some clinician participant comment on that. When he or she refer this AI outputs, usually you can like safely exclude the low score studies because they have no chance to be involved. They are just too irrelevant. And so we can just expect that with many more candidates, you can use AI to exclude those studies which are definitely irrelevant, and then just focus on, like, even you have 1,000, you can just read the top 100 to finalize your final study analysis study list. So we will try to explore that time reduction, how big it will be in the future. So this is a kind of like overview of the first part, right? We can use AI to streamline the review process, extract the previous study design, their characteristics, and also synthesize their evidence, right, to provide your hypothesis and also maybe inform your clinical trial design. And the second part, I will describe like how we use LLMs to enhance the study execution, specifically for participant recruitment in clinical trials. And I will introduce the TrialGPT model. We work with National Institutes of Health researchers in this TrialGPT workflow. So when we talk about participant recruitment, it's actually one of the core tasks in clinical trials, because clinical trial is a human study, right? You need human to do human study. And from phase 1, like we need to recruit like tens of subjects, and then the phase 3 and phase 4, you need hundreds or thousands. All of those like participant recruitment process has been quite challenging. Also in recently, like this is like set of numbers I find from the literature. So there are like estimation of the real world cases, like 29% of the clinical trial cost came from enrollment, this participant recruitment process. And 90% of US trials just fail to hit enrollment goal on time. 27 of sites, right, who are responsible to recruit clinical trial patients, they fail to enroll even a single qualified patient. And 90% of trials were like actually terminated. They failed totally because of they cannot meet their enrollment goal. So this just highlights the need to like streamline the participant recruitment process, and we want to know that how large language model can actually enhance this process, right, streamline this process. And so we have developed a platform just trying to showcase how, like, just a reflection of the backend API that we have for this patient to trial matching pipeline. And this text box represents the input for describing a patient profile. It can be like any text or natural language explanation of these patients. So for example, this is the example clinical note we draw from a benchmark data set. And this describes a participant, a potential candidates and his previous medical histories, the drug he takes, and so on. And when we start this analysis, we're trying to use AI agent to fetch the relevant clinical trials and evaluate the patient's eligibility for each of these trials, each criterion. So for each criteria, you can easily like see the eligibility prediction from the model, if it's pass or non-pass for this criterion, as well as the explanation like why LLMs believe this eligibility prediction is supported by the patient, like input patient profiles. And this criterion level prediction can then be aggregated to give you overall score of the eligibility, right? For example, this first trial, we have like 0.75 score, which is highest among all of them. So this just reduces all the candidate clinical trials. In this case, it's 20,000 actively recruiting clinical trials on city.gov, and we can reduce it to 10, for example, right? You can just review these 10 clinical trials, most recommended ones, to evaluate like which clinical trials this patient may be eligible to. So to achieve this pipeline, we leverage LLMs. So that platform, the interface I showed, just to show how it functions in real world. And behind that is a pipeline that I have talked about, like you have input patient summaries, and we have the first step to do the retrieval, right? You have patients, given this patient knows, we want to make a first step to reduce the candidate to 1,000 by some semantic similarity search, right? We can generate several keywords and reduce this to this retrieval to just keep the top 1,000 relevant ones. And then we can apply TrialGPT matching, right, to predict the eligibility of the patient for the criterion, and then go to the overall aggregated trial level relevance scores and rank that to a top 10 recommended trials. And the results for the first step, for example, we want to know what's the coverage of the TrialGPT retrieval can achieve, right? For example, we use GPT to generate the keywords, and we just retrieve the target studies from all the 20,000 candidates, and we just keep the top 500. I just recall 500, and we find that over 90% of the target studies, right, the patient exactly eligible to can be identified in this top 500 results. Comparing to that, if you just pass a raw patient without any processing, or if you just we involve several clinicians help us extract the keyword, create the search terms from the patient notes, and do exactly the same, the retrieval. And we find the LLMs can synthesize better keywords with absolute 0.167 recall improvement on average, over just have manually extracting the keywords. And after the retrieval stage, right, we can reduce the candidate to 500 or 1,000. Then the key is for this remaining 1,000, if we apply LLM to screen those trial one by one, right, what's exactly the performance of the LLM can achieve for this eligibility assessment. So we have 3 annotators evaluate 1,000 predictions from LLMs and evaluate accuracy in 3 dimensions. First, the rationale, how accurate explanation this LLM gives. And also, we link this eligibility prediction to the parts that patient knows support this eligibility prediction. So this we call it patient node citations. And we can evaluate how LLM can locate this relevant sentences from patient notes. And the last, what's the eligibility prediction, this pass or non-pass, if it's accurate or not. So we find that this model can get relatively high accuracy, 87.3 accuracy in eligibility prediction, for example. And to make a comparison, we have also expert manually evaluate this eligibility, and that accuracy is among 88 to 90%. So it's not 100% accurate, but we can find LLMs in this setup can get a very close performances expert can manually do. But if we can apply LLMs, it can be much faster than just doing it manually. So we this is kind of the overview of how we do like participant recruitment using large language models. And what I didn't introduce in detail is the result. We actually have this model on site in NIH, like have several PIs trying this model to handle the patient inquiries and route to the target clinical trials they are running. And we find that there are like 40% time savings, right? If they have AI help them make pre-screening of the patient inquiries compared to like they just do it manually. And the last part, I will try to introduce like how large language model can enhance the analysis of clinical trial data. So this is exactly like after we conduct the clinical trials, we have patient data and you want to generate some plots like survival curves and so on. So we have this work, we evaluate and develop large language model solution for code generation in data science of clinical trials data. And so data science in medicine in general is quite manual, right? Usually you have a data scientist working with medical experts, and he or she has to do like manual programming to collect the data, like different types of clinical trial or other medical data, and do some processing and analyzing. And the target is to get some novel, like new insights, like new evidence, and at last like improve the patient outcomes. And exactly, meanwhile, recently we find that okay, LLMs are quite good at like programming in general. So there are like several software like products trying to streamline this LLM based programming process, like GitHub Copilot, and also someone like delving like those companies and the researchers, they're trying to develop automatic programming agents as well. But we are interested in especially like how this LLMs based assistant can help in medicine data science. So they are all more on the generic side, right? You have like software engineer trying to use this to develop some front end, back end code. But data science in medicine has some difference, right? First, you have to know the dataset schema, right? Like this is a very like simplified table of clinical trial patient clinical data. And if you ask a question like, give me the patient ID, like who were diagnosed cancer before 50, and to answer this question, you need to write a code that exactly query the column age at the diagnosis and return the column underscore capital patient. So if you have like LM just ask a question, it doesn't know the data schema, it would just it won't never generate the code that can be executed, right? Can work immediately. And the second challenge is like to do the data analysis, you need a data scientist configure the environment for those code, right? You have to set up like some Python environment, install the packages, and make some like code yourself. And that's actually I would say like quite challenging for people who are not coding in their daily workflow. And so to make this like LM actually functional and useful for medical people, you need a execution environment that can execute the LM generated code instead of asking themselves to execute the code. And the third one is like you do need some domain knowledge to get the right code, to get the right answer. And one simple example we can get from this table is like if you just ask what's the most frequent tumor stage of the patient with skin cutaneous melanoma, and this is like a very simple question, but it does need the knowledge. Like since from this table you will never find the value under this cancer type column exactly match this name, skin cutaneous melanoma. Instead, you may find some abbreviations of this cancer type like SKCM. So you do need some knowledge, right? You want to query the column cancer type and find the ones match SKCM for this question to answer this question to get the values. So LMs need to get in depth of the like medical knowledge to actually generate the right code when you have the data. And so with this motivation, we also build a platform, right? On this platform, we have data sets in this platform, like the tables. This is an example gene expression table and the mutation tables, and also the clinical data of the patients from the clinical trial. And after people upload this data set, right, we can query those data sets and ask a question like, could you visualize the distribution of expressed genes, mutations, and patient survival, and so on. So this question will be passed to LM agents, and that agent has the understanding of a dataset schema and some medical knowledge, and try to just generate the code here. And you can execute actually this code in place. You do not need to copy paste to the other coding panel. We can execute it and return the generated figures, those statistics, just immediately, so you can gain insights from your questions. You will see this platform will be quite like natural interaction, or you just ask question, execute the code, and get insights. And if you are more familiar with coding, you can also add the code right here and work with to iteratively refine the code and get more advanced outputs. But the question now is how good LLMs can actually like perform those tasks, right? You have this code and it looks like very, very advanced, but what exactly is it actually leads to right answers or not? So we want to answer this question. Then we try to build a benchmark, right? We want to create the coding challenges for data science that exactly from medical publications. So this one is example paper we involve in our data set, and we'll get some figures, right? The main figures, the main findings from those studies. So this is a one figure people usually do for gene mutation analysis. So it's a heat map of like different gene types and across different clinical samples, and those different colors means the mutation, different types of mutations of paired genes and clinical sample IDs. So this is a very typical gene mutation analysis figure, which is called uncoprint. So with this target figures, and also we get the raw data people use in this publication, then we create some questions, right? Question could be like, generate Python code to create an uncoprint that meets this specific needs, right, for different gene mutation categories, what the y-axis, what the x-axis should be, and then we manually create the code answers, right? We create like for this to answer this request, this is what LM should expect it to write and answer this question and generate these figures. And meanwhile, we create some testing cases, right, based on this code and how to evaluate if this code is right or wrong. We have these testing cases. If the output can pass all the testing cases, then we believe this code is accurate, like actually answer the question. So with this manual process, we have ensured that rigorously this data set reflects the landscape of how people do in clinical trial data or like this biomedical data analysis. This is a kind of statistics of the data set we created. We have Python question and R questions together. This is like distribution of the packages or in the code answers that the answer uses to answer the question. This covers like 39 studies and around 300 analysis like we manually created from those publications. And target figures here, there are some example target figures we reproduce in this data set, like this very basic bar plots of the mutation distribution, some scatter plots, some like pie chart, volcano plot, and survival curve analyzing the different population cohort, and also some box plot comparing outcomes of different cohort and doing some statistical tests to get a significance, and also this kind of complex heat map showing the gene mutation and some distribution. So just give you an overview. So like this benchmark is quite practical, right, and quite diverse, covers like many different types of questions people do in their research for data, like by data science, data analysis. And with this data set, then we want to investigate more like what are effective adaptations to make LM actually work in this scenario. So we start with a vanilla approach, right? You just have very simple prompt, ask a question and ask LM to write the Python code, answer the question, and here's the schema of the data set. And this is called, like we call it vanilla approach this way. And we also compare like an automatic optimized prompts where we use DSPY, a package for automatically optimizing the prompts for LMs. If you set a metric, so metric here is to pass those unit tests. And this is the output we get from this DSPY, like prompting optimization approach. And we find this prompt is slightly more complicated than the vanilla one with some hints and some language to manipulate the LLM's behavior. And we also have like a manual method, right? We have like some knowledge about the data set and have some more hints like from our previous experience, as well as some simple examples. And these are quite more complicated prompts. And then we just compare, okay, for these two prompts, what are the edge of them over the vanilla approach, right, with minimal prompting. And we find this manual prompt has a high winning rate over the vanilla one. LM does leverage some of the domain knowledge we inject into the context, but it doesn't lead to a very high absolute improvement. So you see those dots are like quite close to the equivalent performance curve line. And the automatic prompting approach is not ideal. We find that the winning rate is quite low, and actually in more cases it's worse. It was worse than the vanilla approach. So, which means that this automatic prompting may need like more advanced approach or more iteration perhaps to make it actually work in this case. And it's actually quite hard to develop a better one than just vanilla. And we try more strategies, like you can add like some example question and code answers into the context. So hopefully when I'm encounter the similar question, it can refer to the previous like a correct code answers. But this one doesn't really improve the performance here, because we just use 3 studies, right? We use the training, which can be regarded training data, right? We use 3 studies, which are like around 30 question answers, and dynamically retrieve those question answer and put them into the context. But the test set is more about like the other 20 studies, and they are like not 100% overlap with the training data. So we find that if you fetch some question answers that are actually irrelevant to the target question the LM is handling now, it can undermine the performance. So you find that it has no significance comparing to the vanilla approach. And then we try RAG, right? It's also very, very common and a popular approach to enhance performance. So we just equip this LM agent with external search engines for PubMed publication, GitHub, Google search, Stack Overflow questions, and allow the agent to explore those source data and try to answer the question. And we don't see significant improvement, partially because the code is just too complicated, and it does require some in-depth medical knowledge, but the LLM retrieval and the search capability may not be accurate. So it's still challenging for LLM sometimes to find the right answer from so large corpus of like the internet corpus to find the right answers. And at last, we try like a reasoning approach, right? We just recently people know like DeepSeek and those like ChatGPT, those 3 model or like the deep research model, they're all like kind of reasoning model. And at that time, they were no like a deep research, but we try reasoning, like ask LM to start from the raw request and to do some kind of a thinking to decompose this raw request into like smaller, actionable, granular plan steps. And then we use this thinking process to like guide the LMs to generate the final code. And it does improve the performance a lot, right? You see that from this scatter plot, it has like over 70% winning rate over the vanilla approach, and with a great margin. So this just indicates that this thinking, as well as like if users, human can provide more actionable, more detailed step-by-step guidance, it can actually make these LM agents work instead of just try and error itself. And so the next step, we try to we have explored the effective methods, and we try to integrate the most effective adaptations in practice. And we have like several users trying this platform and answer some questions we assign them. Then we have like when they work with our platform, they have AI generated code as starting point, and then we receive their submitted code, which is their final answer. And we compare this to, we see which parts are like copy pasted from AI and which parts were added by users themselves. So with this approach, we can evaluate to what extent users actually benefit from benefit from the AI generated code in their analysis. And we conducted this user study for 3 medicals to reproduce like main findings from 3 medical publications, and we classify the questions by their difficulty level from easy to hard. And we do find like for easy questions, user reused like over 90% of AI generated code in their answer. So which means like AI can almost just provide perfect answer, but sometimes users still want to modify a little bit. And for medium and hard questions, the ratio is lower, like 60% for medium and 50% for hard tasks. And but still can help like to like streamline this process. But we can imagine if we have LLM agents that can do better and better in generating this code, this ratio, maybe for easy tasks in the future will be 100%, then medium and hard could be higher and higher. Then ultimately we can get a super powerful AI agents to enhance this process in a very efficient manner, and we're still exploring that. So this is kind of the conclusion of this part 3, right? We evaluate how LLMs, cutting-edge LLMs can do data science tasks in clinical trials and biomedical data, and also explore what's the practical benefit it brings, right, when work with human users. So kind of the overall and the future work framework is like going higher, right? What we have introduced, either literature search, data science, they're all under the framework of scientific discovery in medicine, right? You start with generate your hypothesis, doing some kind of experiments like clinical trial, and validate your hypothesis by analyzing the trial data. So these 3 can be all like accelerated, right, in a loop by our like AI for clinical research, AI for data science research, and AI for literature research. And when we have a better solution for these 3 components, we can accelerate this cycle and then lead to like new evidence therapy, clinical practice, and improve the scientific discovery process. And this can definitely benefit from future works in like enhancing human AI collaboration, right? Because AI models or machine learning models, they never be 100% perfect, but we need to find some efficient strategy to have human intervention and to ensure the robustness and trustworthy of the solutions. And meanwhile, we can further enhance improve the upper bound, right? How AI can do with some autonomous AI agent development, as well as the multimodality AI agents, right? There are like all types of medical data with different modalities, images, text, signals, so those stuff. And also kind of like medical data, they're like, for example, literature data, they're quite segmented, right? If we have like LLM solutions, they can do data processing and they can generate code to do data processing, then it's possible that we can have the multi-source data integrated together with the help of AI agents and then provide a quite comprehensive overview of medical data and accelerate this like process. So this is the end of this talk. I'm happy to take any questions if you have like, and yeah, thanks again.
Great. Thanks, Zifeng. This is a lot of work that you completed in your past few years, right? And in your thesis. So yeah, audience, I know we are kind of running out of time, but we're gonna stay for a few minutes, I think, to chat. And you're welcome to ask questions if you have in the chat or just directly. So I will kick off maybe like a general question. So you did a lot of this work for applying AI in clinical trials. What are some unexpected finding or insights that you learned from this using a large language model in clinical research and drug development process?
Yeah, thanks for the question. So I think people from computer science background like me usually believe that a lot of tasks there are same as we are dealing with in general domain. Like for example, for text generation or like some retrieval or search They are like quite commonly studied research topics in natural language processing community. But when we work on clinical trial, like this specific domain, we do find that there are some difference where we may neglect or unaware of when we are in this computer science community. For example, when we apply AI algorithm for literature research and just directly apply some generic method like prompting LLMs or some embeddings, you may find it's like not perfect solution for that scenario. But when we go into that domain and try to understand what medical experts are actually do in review, like in literature research, we find that there are some like guidelines or like their expert practice, which are like you need to really know the domain and those guidelines and those practices are quite helpful. In turn, if you know that, you can use that to help design your AI algorithms and workflow and to actually pass that gap, right? You have perfect AI algorithm and how to adapt that to like real medical users work the real tasks and optimize for their tasks. So I think that's the main lesson I learned like when as a computer science researcher going to this kind of like clinical trial domain.
Yeah, that's very true. I mean, there are a lot of CS researchers probably naively felt that if a solution can work for generic settings, it probably can solve or be applied in any of those application domain, which is oftentimes not the case. So in because your work is very much focused in this practical clinical trials, drug development domain, and now you're doing both academic work and also kind of commercialization and deployment, trying to build a practical software for this industry, right? How do you see the innovations when you practically trying to build some tool, some software that works, right? Does that change some of your thoughts in terms of what consider interesting research and what consider really hard challenges when you actually try to deploy those in practice?
Yeah, that's a quite good question, and I do feel like working with industry folks, like especially with medical background, is like different from doing pure AI research in like doing pure AI research because you if you read from those like public like AI publications, you do know like there are some quite popular ones, and there are some benchmark data set you can work on improving the algorithms and with a better performance on benchmarks. But when working with industry folks, you know that those benchmark. So first, those benchmark may not necessarily reflect the real world complexity of their daily task. And second, there are quite a few tasks you like a pure AI researchers may actually never know, right? When they're like they will actually never know, right? And we do find like some interesting research questions, like by developing or like getting familiar with the real tasks people are encountering in clinical trials and drug development, and that converts to some I would say like some very interesting AI task, for example, the patient recruitment and and so on. So I think that the lesson was like doing this. For me, I'm more of doing like application research of AI, and to make it like really useful and or like I mean try to make it more impact. It's always benefit to like working with like with domain background people. People may not necessarily know a lot about AI, but they have a lot of questions they want to resolve, and they're interested in AI. So that's I think a great lesson I learned.
Yeah, definitely. I think totally agree. In all of those practical domain, defining the question, right, that formulate that in a if in this AI machine learning setting, that's can be probably half of the challenge, right? Then gathering the data, create the benchmark is probably another big chunk of the effort. And developing algorithm is probably much less challenging in this brand new real world domain. So if I think there's, I didn't see any chat, so I assume there's no question. Maybe.
Do you mind if I ask
Yes,
a question?
Please go ahead, Patrick.
Oh, thank you so much. So first of all, thank you for the very insightful talk, and also congrats to your PhD thesis. And I've actually been following your work for a while, so it was great to see a summary of your research. And I had a question regarding the processing of the clinical trial data, particularly from sources like, as you mentioned, clinical trials.gov. When I worked on this data in the past myself, I found it quite challenging to parse it into a structured format, especially since inclusion and exclusion criteria were often very inconsistently formatted, and they were unstructured and also pretty chaotic. So I wanted to ask, did you use any specific pre-processing techniques to handle this variability?
Yeah, that's a good question. Like a lot of clinical trial or like a medical literature data you can find, they are quite unstructured. I would say clinicaltrial.gov is already quite structured compared with the other relevant data sets. But for eligibility criteria, I think they do have some structures in their like the raw data you can find. So for example, you can try some like some simple like sentence segmentation algorithm. They're trying to segment the entire eligibility criteria blocks into small sentence level criteria. And also we do use some name entity recognition algorithm trying to detect the key entities from those criteria. And that helps us to like decide the which criterion they are, like semantically they are a single criterion and so on. So I think there are a lot of technical details where you can use some NLP algorithm trying to do that.
That's interesting. I think I'll have a look at your code if it's open source, because I remember back then I also used named entity recognition, but actually there were many negations sometimes that put me into a lot of problems, to be honest.
Yeah. I was more talking about like because the raw criteria, they are like a text blocks, or they're like documents. But I think the step I was talking about is more like decomposing that text block into single criteria first. Then after that, then comes to like in-depth analysis of the negation, those description, those stuff like a value ranges. They are more in-depth analysis than just like parsing the criteria, I would say. Yeah.
Okay, I understand. All right, thank you so much. I have one more question, if you mind. So I think that was for the second part that you mentioned. So did you use the TrialGPT model maybe in the track clinical trials shared task? Because the data actually seemed quite familiar to me.
Yeah, I think that there are like two or three like publicly like benchmark for patient to trial matching. I think track has two. We do use that, but we also create some because that data set only has like a trial level eligibility, and we try to assess the model's performance in criterion level eligibility, and we do have like several clinical like medical experts from NIH help us annotate criterion level eligibility of like 1,000 patient to criterion level data, and I think that's a different one from the previous data set.
Okay. All right, I get it. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Cool. I think there's another question in the chat from Arimus. How did the amount of data trained impact the quality of the answer for different questions? And they trained GPT Llama on much larger data set than PubMed. Did you feel like the fine-tuned PubMed limits the amount of you could improve the model? Or can you comment on that?
Thanks for the question. So for the first one, I think we didn't do experiments, especially trying to use the partial of the data to train the model. We just use whatever we can find. I mean, all the data we can find to like maximize the performance for the LLMs for the target tasks. So I think that's we don't have the answer, but I think like in general, those tasks with more challenges are usually can benefit from more data. And for some tasks maybe less challenging, for example, data study screening, we use quite a few data, and our model can literally get a very close performance or slightly better than GPT-4 on that case. But for more challenging tasks like data extraction, right, you want to extract the target results data from the entire publication. That's a quite challenging task, and I think our data set is still not sufficient, like large enough to make that performance really high enough, like in over 90% accuracy, for example. So I think that can definitely benefit from more data if we can annotate that in the future. And for your second question, I think yeah, there were indeed some specialized model fine-tuned on PubMed, those corpus, right? And because they are like quite amount of text you can find from those publications. But I don't think that can make a very different performance than the generic model like GPT's model, because those model, I believe, they all have those public data, those texts in their training corpus. So you won't benefit a lot by just continuing training on the same corpus again. But in our case, it's different because we are not just using the raw text to make a continued pre-training. Instead, we create a data generation pipeline that try to convert those raw text into the instruction data that are more aligned with the target task we are working on, like the study search, screening, instruction. So in that sense, that conversion is the key to make the fine-tuned model much better than the ones just using the raw text for continued pre-training. So that's I hope I answered your two questions. Yeah.
Okay, cool. Oh, Amaris, you want to clarify something there or follow up?
Just really appreciate it. Really interesting talk. And so maybe the big difference is you think you were solving a problem that was more specific. And do you think something like fine-tuning the models initially and then using that fine-tuned model might have benefited? Or do you think that's something that wouldn't play too big a role, and intermediary steps don't help as much? Using Mistral is a good enough starting point, and then going directly into solving the specific use case?
Yeah, I think the generic model is quite powerful. They have, I think those companies, the researchers, they already have trying to collect all the public available data, so even not public available data sources. And I think that all the information you can find easily, they are already in the model. They have the knowledge already. But I think to adapt those base model, if they are powerful enough, I think to adapt them to specific tasks you have at hand. More importantly is to create the data that are close enough to the target task you are working on, like the task we were talking about. I think that takes a great amount of effort if you want to do it manually. But I think sometimes you can find some smart ways to create that data automatically, and also ensuring the high quality of those data, like what we did for the LEADS model on literature mining. I think that's the main insights there.
Yeah, I think that's what the genius is of kind of ChatGPT, is the fact that they were able to use all the data on the web because they're just predicting the next word. So instead of what Google was doing was labeling, even 20 or 10 years ago, when they were asking you to label videos on YouTube, kind of what are the tags and so on. That's so much effort, and it's the question is, what is the quality of that? Whereas ChatGPT, they don't use all the data, but as long as the data is coming from a book or a publication, or it's quality enough, then it's useful enough, and you don't need to label the data. And I think that's one of the issues with OpenAI and all the big companies, is they're trying to solve everything all at once. Now they're trying to kind of focus in on specific verticals, trying to make something for finance or make something for healthcare. But none of the big ones are focusing on healthcare, as maybe Oracle now. And I think, they're so broad that maybe there's some opportunity to take what they have, fine tune, and then the last step is, do exactly what you're doing to kind of carry it all the way to the very end. But, they trained on PubMed, but maybe PubMed was 2% of their total database, and maybe, all the other training kind of overlapped the other information, and kind of, some of the information maybe got lost with the training of other data sets.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's definitely quite interesting research topic too. I mean, there are still very actively research in this domain. Right? Recently, some reinforcement learning based approach, right, like elicit the reasoning capability of LMs. If you can create your data smartly with solid evaluation rules or some solid evaluation metric, even without human annotation of the ground truth answers, you can still improve the model performance. I think that's quite promising for us. Also, develop super helpful vertical models if you know exactly the task and how to find those evaluation metrics, how to find those rules. They are maybe in some clinical guidelines, maybe just from the experience of clinicians and so on. So I think that's definitely some opportunities, and I'm quite also interested in this further exploration. Yeah.
Really interesting. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Cool. I think maybe we can wrap up with the question I always ask everyone on the, especially I think it's perfect question for Zifeng to answer. Now he's at the end of his PhD process, and looking backward, I mean, I know Zifeng very well. I mean, I think I know him very well, and he's a very efficient person. So if you can go back in time to the beginning of your PhD and give one piece of advice to yourself on research, what would that be? And
Yeah, thanks, Professor. Yeah, I think I attended previous talk. There's always a question you ask, so I think I made some preparation on that as well. So I think first I think for myself specifically, I think I need to pick the right question to solve, because usually people, especially recently, like there are so many topics, so many tasks, and breaking news every day. You may find that you always want to catch up the most recent research progress, and it's kind of more, I mean, it's more of like too many things you can do, and but one person is usually has limited energy. So I would like to think more carefully which are the tasks that worth like a commitment for like a month or 3 months and so on. So I think that's in that process definitely can benefit from talking more to the other researchers, and also my advisor or some people so on. I think that's a benefit to benefit for better commitment. That's the first one. And the second, I think one big thing I learned is for researcher, I should have to keep all the research in line in the relatively narrow topic instead of working very diverse. Right? If you keep working on a very focused topic, you can be really more and more experts in your own domain, instead of having a very superficial term initially, then try another, then you will end up having not really solving a question, solving a problem in depth. So I think that it's definitely beneficial to pick the topic you are really interested in, and you can see the opportunities there. Then just keep working on that. Do not distracted by something maybe quite far from your domain and so on. And I think the third one is trying to become more expert in coding, because I think AI research recently becomes a competition of, I would say I will limit the scope into application AI research. It's all about your speed in implementation of your code during your experiments. So definitely learn better, get better in coding will benefit your research. And now that you have Cursor and those AI tools, so you should definitely try to leverage the power of AI to streamline your scientific discovery process. So I think that's the thing I can come up with for now. Yeah.
Cool. So be selective, choose the right problem, be really focused on that, right? So you can be a true expert on that domain. and be efficient, right? So if you're, especially in the application domain, the speed really matters. Great, great. Thanks. I think that's perfect for this webinar. Thanks for everyone. Stay 20 minutes in, and congratulations for Zifeng, just defended his PhD recently. And for all the audience, if you haven't checked out our future webinar, you can follow the link and take a look. Or there's quite a few exciting speakers coming up in the next few weeks. So we're looking forward to see you guys back again. Great. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks again. Bye.
Bye.